will put down a motion which effectively will call for Brexit to be delayed beyond the 31st of October until the end of January. And everybody thought Boris would be specific and say that if that was voted down, that he would call an election and there'd be a vote on the Wednesday. He didn't say that. What he said was, he laid out the fact that his government have got lots of new domestic ideas and policies, and it's crime, it's policing, it's education, the NHS, and that's why he's put down a Queen's speech. He said he's very encouraged by the progress he's making with Brussels. They understand we want a deal. They like our positive approach, but that it's not credible if Parliament was to take no deal off the table. He said effectively his negotiations are being held back by Parliament. He's urged MPs tomorrow to vote against delay, and he said there are no circumstances in which I will accept delay. So actually, without saying it, he did say that if he loses tomorrow, we will be into a vote in the House of Commons on whether there should be a general election. Tony Blair earlier on today intervening quite strongly on that, and we'll listen to him. But Jeremy Corbyn, very difficult for Jeremy Corbyn to oppose a general election, given that he's campaigned for one for the last year and more. So Boris Johnson laying it out, but the big takeout, the big message here is Boris Johnson wants the withdrawal agreement. He wants Mrs May's withdrawal agreement, but minus the backstop. And if he does get voted down in the House of Commons tomorrow, which I have to say, looking at the Tory rebels who are beginning to stand up, does now seem quite likely to me, then there'll be a general election. So I'm asking you tonight, are you ready for a general election? If you say, yep, bring it on, call 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think, like Brenda from Bristol famously in 2017, oh no, not another one, in which case text to 84850. And I guess you're all going to be asking me what I'm going to do. Because do I think it's acceptable that a general election could be held on the basis that he goes back to Brussels to get the withdrawal agreement? Well, I absolutely don't. Let me know what you think by tweeting using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, you can watch us on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. I'm going to go to Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor. Theo.
Good evening, Nigel. What was interesting about that short Boris Johnson speech on the steps of number 10 Downing Street is that he did not say explicitly that there will be an election if MPs vote tomorrow to take control of the parliamentary timetable, allowing them on Wednesday to bring forward legislation to extend Article 50 until January the 31st of next year. He blinked. He had an opportunity to face them down and to say, right, this is the time I will have to call an election, but he did not say it explicitly. He indicated that would be the case. He said the public didn't want an election, but he didn't say it explicitly. And I'm looking at in front of the 4 pages of the bill that MPs have drafted, to which they bring forward if they're successful tomorrow in taking control of the parliamentary agenda. And they've even been so helpful, Nigel, as to write the letter to the President of the European Council for Boris Johnson, to Donald Tusk. And it does the job for him. Dear Mr. President, the UK Parliament has passed this bill, and its provisions now require Her Majesty's government to seek an extension of the period provided under Article 50 of the Treaty of the European Union. And of course it is signed not just by Hilary Benn, the Labour Brexit chairman of the Select Committee, the Brexit Select Committee, I should say, but it's also signed by the former Foreign Office Minister Alistair Burt, the former Chancellor Philip Hammond, and the former Justice Secretary David Gauke. So at the moment, it looks as if Boris Johnson is fighting a losing battle if he is to persuade Remainers within his own party not to side with Jeremy Corbyn. So to have taken that stance that he just did, Theo, does he look weak or does he look wise? He looks like he's blinked. That's what it looks like. It looks as if Boris Johnson, at the crucial moment, has actually ducked the confrontation that he needed to have. Because, of course, if he were to have said, let's have a general election, then he could have gone and had it. But he didn't.
No, he didn't.
He didn't, and it gives him the wriggle room on Wednesday or even next week that if MPs firstly are successful in taking control of the parliamentary timetable and then they are successful in passing this legislation, it gives Boris Johnson the wriggle room to say, well, actually, I don't need to call a general election because I didn't promise one.
No, but he did say very explicitly there are no circumstances in which I will accept any delay. Or is that just a Borisism that could be ignored?
Well, if the problem is that this morning Gavin Williamson had to clarify Michael Gove's comments on Sunday when he was touring the television studios, where he said that the government would, where Gavin Williamson said that the government would abide by the law as previous governments have done. Now, Number 10 this morning were trying to indicate that the government would abide by any legislation passed by MPs, but they specifically wouldn't say whether they would abide by this piece of legislation if it's brought by MPs. There may be some slightly underhand tactics or tricks that Number 10 could use. One of those is that's been talked about. It could refuse to give royal assent to the bill, whereby the bill passes all three stages in the House of Commons, all three stages in the House of Lords, and then the government, rather than sending the bill off to be signed by Her Majesty the Queen, which is a formality, simply doesn't allow that to happen. Another trick is that Boris Johnson could adhere by the law and go to the European Council summit on the 17th of October and say to Donald Tusk, now I need to ask for an extension, please may I have an extension to Article 50, and then nip round the back and speak to somebody quite favourable to the UK's position, somebody like Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban, and say, Mr. Orban, please could you help us out and veto any extension, because of course an extension requires unanimous support from all 27 other EU leaders. Please could you veto this extension because I have to ask for it under UK law, but if you were to refuse it then we'd leave because the European Union wouldn't have accepted it. So there are various methods that Boris Johnson could deploy, but ideally he wants to be able to ensure that his own MPs stick together and do not undermine the Conservative position.
And he wants
in his
a deal.
view is to deliver Brexit.
And he wants a deal. When he talks now about the deal, he's talking about it with great passion, isn't he?
He does want a deal. He wants to remove the backstop, and of course I know this relates directly to your Brexit party because you've issued an ultimatum to him this afternoon saying that you'd be willing to enter into a non-aggression pact with the Conservative Party if the Conservative Party were willing to ditch the withdrawal agreement in its entirety, which of course means taking out it's around about £33 billion now, isn't it, that we owe the European Union, given that we had to extend to October the 31st, and then any agreements, and then the agreement on EU citizens' rights, which is a bit of an anomaly because we've already made that agreement separate to the withdrawal agreement itself. So Boris Johnson, if he were to agree to that, and it'd be interesting to know your thoughts, whether you would simply find yourself fighting Labour in the north of England and in the Midlands and Wales.
Well, I think that's right, Theo. I think the whole point about the Brexit Party non-aggression pact is that if Boris went for a clean break Brexit, we'd want to work with him and support him, and we'd say to him, look, you know, the receipts like Pontefract, Labour seats, 70% leave vote, Yvette Cooper the MP, Brexit Party could beat Labour in that seat, Tory Party couldn't. So that's the kind of accommodation we'd look towards. But I have to say, Theo, I think that looks further away tonight than it looked perhaps at the start of today, because it's pretty clear that Boris Johnson wants the deal. Theo, find out some more intelligence for us, please. Don't run away. Let's go to the public. Let's get your reaction. What did you make of Boris Johnson's statement? Do you think Theo's right? Do you think that he blinked? Or do you think that he was wise? He said he didn't want a general election, but then hinted that if Parliament votes for a delay, he would find it unacceptable. Is Boris beginning to look a bit weak? You tell me. Martin in Harrogate is a new caller. Good evening.
Hello, Nigel. Many thanks for taking my call.
Not at all. What do you make of it?
What do I make of it? I think with what Theo has just said, that's what's going to happen.
Okay.
We've got to have an election, Nigel, in my eyes.
I think it's almost unavoidable now, Martin, isn't it? I mean, if all these Conservatives, are co-signing letters and motions with Hilary Benn of Labour, I just don't see how Johnson survives this vote tomorrow.
No, I don't. Absolutely not. And it is a case that we should not pay Brussels one penny, Nigel. Nigel, if it all goes as I hope it will, then fine.
If Martin. And how do you feel? How do you feel, Martin, as a Leaver, when you hear the Prime Minister so keen to get the withdrawal agreement back on the table with an amendment to the backstop?
It frightens me.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah, there's a few things actually that petrify me, Nigel, because I don't really know the ins and outs of the backstop. Pardon my ignorance.
No, that's all right. I promise you, most people don't. We had a sort of tutorial on it the other week, but it's not straightforward. Martin, listen, thanks for your thoughts. Thanks for your call on Facebook. Pat says, no, Nigel, I don't want an election. I want Brexit first. I get a text here from Chris in Gravesend. He says, Nigel, I can't stomach another vote. This is becoming ridiculous. It makes a mockery of our system. Let's ask Graham in Worcester what he makes of it. Good evening, Graham.
Good evening, Nigel. I'm absolutely appalled, to be honest, that we're 3 years down the road and we're still in this quagmire. The great thing is that you had the nous to get the Brexit party together. You've done so well. I mean, you've proven time and time again that the people of this country want out. What we need now, though, Nigel, is for you and Boris to work together.
But the problem is, Graham,
just the same as what the Liberal Democrats have started to do.
But Graham,
with their people.
Graham, I've just heard the Prime Minister speaking in glowing, optimistic terms about the negotiations with Brussels and how the deal is now back on the table. He's optimistic they'll change the backstop, and it's as if the rest of it is somehow now okay to Boris Johnson, even though he voted twice against it.
Well, we don't know that, and if he's poked out, which it looks like these backstabbers are now colluding to do against the British people, we can have a clean sweep of all these Tories, these backstabbing Tories. They can all be got rid of.
Well,
you've got some great people. I think together, if you tactically stand the way that they're going to tactically stand, I think you two can work together and you can maybe get into this deal and put out the bad bits and get us something, because we have to leave.
Graham, there are no good bits in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's 585-page treaty. We know that, but maybe you can come up with something different. Because at the end of the day, if you guys can win a general election combined together, surely you can go back to them and say, right, this is the British people have spoken.
Yeah.
It's at the end of the day, the EU isn't the be-all and end-all of trade, which they're being purported to be. We all know that. At the end of the day, they haven't grown in the
well, and also, Graham, the idea that our exports would collapse. I mean, the average tariff on UK goods going to the European Union will be about just over 4%. I mean, goodness me, the currency moves that every single week. Graham, I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on to Mary in Hemel Hempstead. Now, Mary, we spoke a couple of weeks ago, didn't we?
That's right, yes.
And just to remind listeners who either don't remember or weren't listening, you voted for Boris Johnson in the leadership contest. I was speculating, if you remember, that I thought he wanted to go back and rework the deal. He's just made that very clear, Mary, hasn't he?
Oh, yes. I listened to his... Well, mind you, I only voted for him because what was the alternative? Jeremy Hunt?
Well,
but the thing is that listening to the speech, it was like a damp squib. All the headlines this morning, you either back us or you're going to be sacked.
Yes.
It just suddenly, he was weak. He was sounding like Theresa May all over again.
Do you know, I was thinking before, all those statements Mrs May made, one at 8 o'clock in the evening, and people cancelling dinner arrangements to listen to the Prime Ministerial speech, and they were all damp squibs. And has Boris blinked, Mary?
Well, that's what it seems like to me, and I just feel, we all know that he's never going to agree to work with you because for some reason he hates you. But the thing is, hopefully you'll be able to win in areas who will never vote Conservative. I mean, I'm in a very difficult situation. Unfortunately, I've got a very good MP, and he's Conservative, Mike Penning. But I'm stuck, like, in the middle. Who do I vote for? I want to vote Brexit, but I don't want Corbyn to get in, but I've got a good MP. But those areas that haven't got, got bad MPs, have not supported what they've...
Well, what about the Labour areas, Mary? What about the north of England?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's where you stay, because they're never going to vote Tory, are they?
I wouldn't have thought so. Mary, how disappointed in Boris are you?
Very, very disappointed, because it seems to be getting... It just seems as if, like, we're turning the clock back again.
Okay,
going backwards.
Mary, powerful words. And Mary, they're saying it was like a Theresa May press conference, when you don't get much more damning than that. Jack is calling from Whitechapel, who's a new caller. Jack, were you inspired?
Hi, Nigel.
Were you inspired by the Prime Minister?
I wouldn't say inspired, but what I will say is that he's trying to manipulate and manoeuvre his position. He's already outflanked them, and which has caused sort of all kinds of mayhem in the Remainer ranks. I think he should go for a general election. I hope he does, because I think we need to clear the air a bit. I think we need to clear the decks. I think we need someone who's actually got the will to actually try and push a deal through, or to risk going with no deal if that's what it takes. My fear was what you would do in terms of, I don't know, you've got this non-aggression pact, is what you and the Brexit Party would do, how you could work with the Conservatives
Jack,
to try and get this over the line.
Jack, I don't want the deal. I don't want the deal without the backstop. I still think it's the worst deal in history. What
would be a good deal for you?
Right, well, a good deal, of course, would be a simple free trade agreement, a standstill on tariffs whilst we sort out a future trade agreement.
You know what frustrates me, Nigel, and I'm going to say this to you, because most people don't say... The truth is the only reason we need a deal is because we're being bullied. Because the truth is, we could have a free trade agreement with Europe at any time they wanted, and the bottom line is that they have to make an example of us, and that's why we're in this mess. Not because we necessarily need the deal. They basically are bullying us into this position to make sure.
Jack, I'm absolutely convinced that given the time, given there's less than 60 days to go, that right now, no deal's the best deal. Getting out with a clean break Brexit, and thereafter we will get a trade deal. But we cannot rejig or rework that withdrawal agreement in any way at all. And I think Boris Johnson is making an historical mistake.
I agree with you.
You know, if he gets it through and it becomes law, the acrimony it will lead to for year after year, because we will have given the whip hand in all future
probably
negotiations.
Better off with a clean break and starting again.
Well, that's what I think, Jack. And I tell you what, if Boris reaches that conclusion, I will do everything I can to make him a national hero. All right?
There you go.
I couldn't be simpler. I couldn't be simpler than that. Jack, thank you. Interesting reactions we're getting here. Paul says 5 million Labour leavers have been put in the bin and forgotten about and told to stop moaning. Nigel, it's now the people versus Parliament. Tom in Epsom says, I would have voted for Theresa May's deal and will only accept the negotiated deal. Nobody voted for no deal. Well, no one voted for a deal, Tom. We didn't vote for a deal or against a deal. And indeed, 498 MPs, when they voted to trigger Article 50, voted to leave with or without a deal. I'm going to Luxembourg to speak to Catherine, who's a new caller. Good evening, Catherine.
Hello.
So what did you make of Boris's speech?
I suppose my point being that I, although I was originally suspicious of him, I prefer Michael Gove, actually. I feel that he's just lost some of his momentum, that he'd been sort of really ploughing through, being quite impressive. But with all the flack he's had over the word that I cannot say, prorogation, whatever it is.
Yeah, I know.
I feel that he's slightly stumbling in a very Boris way.
Do you? So do you think that he blinked then with that press conference? Well, is there a slight loss of nerve from Boris?
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly how I'd seen it in his character before. When originally when we had the referendum, he the reason Gove kind of was so fed up with him was because I think he lost his nerve. And he was out partying and not actually saying, right, okay, we've won this, we've got to now work at Brexit.
Well,
which is what
I think he was.
Boris
I think
trying to
actually
do.
he was actually playing cricket, Catherine. But I guess that's a form of partying. Catherine, where do we go from here?
I just feel, and I live in Luxembourg. I love Luxembourg. I love Europe. Have a house in France too. I've got my Luxembourgish passport, so I have both. But I think for Britain it's better to do Brexit.
Yeah. Okay. Well.
Both.
I do too, Catherine. Catherine, thank you. And several of you saying you think Boris blinked. You think Boris lost his nerve. Tough talk about calling elections. Tough talk about facing down those in his party. Maybe he's kept that up his sleeve. I don't know. What do you think? You listen to the Nigel Farage Show. It is now 6:31. Time for the news with Lisa Aziz.
Boris Johnson's made a live statement outside Number 10, insisting the UK will be leaving the EU at the end of October, come what may. The Prime Minister says he's encouraged by the progress being made in Brexit talks with Brussels and urged MPs...
Is it time to arm police officers? Is it time for police officers to have tasers? And this is what Bill Bratton said.
I would see that as extraordinarily beneficial for morale for your officers, that you care about them and their safety. But as you know, your officers really don't want the majority of them to carry firearms. But at the same time, you have an obligation to help them protect themselves and the public. And one of the things that can be effective against knife-type crime, rather than guns, is a taser.
Well, I have to say, ever since the London Bridge attacks, ever since that policeman took on the terrorists just with an extendable truncheon and got badly stabbed, I've thought tasers made sense. And Nick Ferrari is now launching a Time for Tasers campaign, an LBC campaign, and it's absolutely got my full support. I felt this for some time must be the right thing to do. Now, back to Boris. We've had the press conference. He says he doesn't want a general election, but he can't accept further delay. Did he blink a little bit, or was it wise not to be explicit about saying if he loses tomorrow, if there is a delay to Article 50, he'll call an election? I guess that would mean another press conference tomorrow. Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor, will we be back again at 6 o'clock in Downing Street?
It's a very good question, Nigel. The reason I'm just bringing you up to date because as we were discussing at just after 6 o'clock, Boris Johnson didn't say, as we were talking about, didn't say explicitly that he would call an election if MPs vote to take control of the parliamentary timetable tomorrow. The effect of that would be to try and pass legislation forcing the Prime Minister back to Brussels to seek an extension. Number 10 have just been in touch with me to say that Boris Johnson hasn't blinked. He doesn't want MPs to destroy his negotiating position with the European Union. Boris Johnson's phrase in that speech was that by forcing him back to Brussels to seek an extension, they would chop the legs out of his negotiating position with the European Union, and that Boris Johnson was very clear in that message when he addressed the nation. But I was listening to some of your callers as I walked out of the studio, and they certainly feel that, I was listening to Mary from Hemel Hempstead, who was disappointed in Boris, Boris Johnson, that he had failed to live up to the expectation, and that this was a moment, of course, coming off the back of last night's briefing to the newspapers, that anybody who voted with Jeremy Corbyn or abstained in the vote tomorrow would be deselected or have the whip removed from them. Boris Johnson didn't follow through with that threat today, because he didn't say that he would call an election if the government loses the vote tomorrow. And so, if you're sitting in Philip Hammond's office or having a pint of beer or glass of wine with David Gauke or Rory Stewart, you would feel emboldened. You would think that they'd be emboldened tonight to rebel, because Boris Johnson did not say that he would call an election if he loses tomorrow. He simply said it would be so unfair on me because you would weaken my negotiating position. Or
indeed remove the whip, which was the other big story overnight, wasn't it?
Yeah, removing the whip. I mean, that's a huge threat, because of course Boris Johnson voted twice against Theresa May. Jacob Rees-Mogg tough talk from him when he came out onto the airwaves this morning, taking calls with Nick Ferrari on LBC, said tomorrow's vote would be a confidence matter. We then had talk at lunchtime of Cabinet being reconvened, possible general election, a statement from a number 10 source saying that tomorrow's vote is a vote in the confidence that Parliament has in the government's negotiating position with the European Union. Not quite saying it was the Parliament's confidence in the government itself, but all the talk was ramping up the prospect of a general election for Boris Johnson to get his Brexit over the line, and suddenly suddenly when he had the chance to deliver on that promise in front of the nation, in front of the television cameras, in front of number 10 Downing Street, he balked.
I tell you what, Theo, if number 10's press office are ringing up complaining about a word that LBC have used, I think it's because we're quite near the mark. Theo Usherwood, thank you very much indeed. And, where was the threat? Where was the, if my own side vote against me, I'll get rid of them? There was none of that. But Tony in Romford takes a different view. He says, Nigel, Boris and his team are not fools. He's given the rebel in his party a chance to toe the line. If they don't, he'll have concrete proof and deselect them. Then he'll call a general election on Wednesday. So Tony thinks it was cleverer for Boris not to be so upfront. I wonder what Simon in Carlisle makes of Boris's performance. Hi, Simon.
Hello, Nigel. Nigel, Boris was not weak. He did not blink. He was wise. He has got the mug on side, and together, if they can't get it through over the line, they will get it through in a general election. But only, I have to emphasise, only if you are prepared to work tactically with him. The Labour and Lib Dems will form a Remainer coalition, and you have spent your whole life in this campaign, and now if you don't form a tactical coalition with the Conservatives, you're going to die on the altar, consumed by your own ideological purity. You've got to make sure that you're not consumed by your own zeal. And
Simon, I understand what you're saying. 2 points to make. Firstly, what is the point of having a press conference and not saying anything? I presume if he does lose the vote, there'll be another press conference tomorrow and probably another one on Wednesday. And for your big point, Simon, I get what you're saying completely, which is why I've said, very happy to put party before country, very happy to support a Prime Minister that wants to deliver a clean break Brexit. But Simon, I haven't spent 27 years campaigning on this to be signed up to a withdrawal agreement that in some ways is worse than staying a member of the European Union.
If it has to go to a general election, you will find a way to work with Boris in a coalition, tactically, wisely, in a way that makes sure that the Brexit vote, the Leave vote, is not split between you guys, the Conservatives, and the Brexit Party, to allow the coalition potentially of Labour and Liberal Democrats to come up through the middle and make sure that your life's work is undone. You will never get another chance.
Well, I'll tell you what, Simon, my life's work is undone if that withdrawal agreement goes through, because we'll be stuck in it for year after year after year. And that's how I feel about it. But Simon, I, of course, get your point. Peter from Yateley says by message, you're underestimating Boris. He's playing his cards close to his chest. Of course, an election is the ultimate weapon, but there's a sequence of moves to go through first. OK, Peter, I did say at the start, was he being weak or was he being wise? And quite a few of you are coming through thinking that actually he was wise. Benny on Twitter says, I think Johnson is being crafty by making the promises outside number 10. I think it's to get votes in the event of an election. Well, Benny, he could be saying, look, I'm really sincere. And then when he calls an election, he says, look, it's with great regret I'm doing this. He wouldn't be alone in that. Lots of people, I suspect, don't really want a general election. I wonder what Sam from Montreux in Switzerland thinks.
Hi, Nigel. Just three things. I'm in a restaurant now, but anyway.
Good for you.
Number one, some of your callers said that his speech was not that great. I thought his speech was absolutely strong and amazing. The most important thing he said in that speech, that he will not, under any circumstances, ask for an extension. Whoever voted Brexit or Remain, we do not want an extension. I'm a businessman, and this is killing us, okay?
Yep, we need some certainty. No, I get that, Sam.
Uncertainty is killing us. Number two is, let us assume that he doesn't get exactly the deal that you want, okay? And then he goes for a general election. Now, the thing is, if you don't vote with him and if you don't help him, you're going to split up his vote and you're going to let Corbyn or the Liberals come in. So I don't know how you're going to play this one, because you can't win an overall majority, whatever happens. The Tories are there as well, because a lot of people will go back to the Tories and they say, well, at least they got us out. So, it's going to be disastrous, because Corbyn will be there, Lib Dems will be there, and actually nobody will be there.
Well, Sam, the withdrawal agreement is a disaster. It binds us in for years to come. I don't think we'll ever leave the customs union. And frankly, we may as well stay members of the EU. It's that bad.
I was just going to say, having the withdrawal agreement and staying in, which is worse? Withdrawal agreement is worse.
In some ways,
Sam, at the table.
In some ways, we have. I mean, in some ways, Sam, it's awful. It's awful. Sam, enjoy your meal. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 6:45, and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz.
In a live statement outside Number 10, Boris Johnson's insisted there are no circumstances in which he'll ask Brussels to delay Brexit, urging MPs to vote against any opposition plans to block it when they reconvene tomorrow. The Prime Minister says he doesn't want to see a general election after Labour
proposed, but we do think it is going to be an extension to Article 50 to the end of January if no deal can be found. And of course, this is all in the guise of stopping no deal. Boris there, in his speech, really talking up the negotiations with the EU. Been suggested to me that maybe that speech was designed for the EU to hear as opposed to British voters. I guess, if you read between the lines, he is saying he will call a general election if he loses that vote tomorrow, because he can't accept delay. The favourite date is the 14th of October for a general election, the reason being the European summit is the 17th and 18th of October, with, of course, the deadline of the 31st of October. I personally have to say, the fact that he's so keen on going back to that withdrawal agreement, minus the backstop, for me, beggars belief. Paul takes a different view by text and says it was an act of genius. Any Conservative who votes against him will be out of work. An election will happen. It'll be a landslide. Well, maybe. We have a new caller from Los Angeles called Paul. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning. Honour to speak to you at last. My take is that I think he's had to appear prime ministerial at this point. If he came out all guns blazing, I think that would turn those traitors into martyrs. He has to...
Traitors, Paul. Paul, you just used the word traitors.
Well, the Conservatives that are voting against him after having stood on a manifesto, I don't know what other word can you use about them.
Okay.
But he would have legitimised their position if he came out and let them set the agenda. As you were saying, we don't even know what their tactic is this week. So if he'd have shown his hand first today, that would have been completely foolhardy. What he's done, he's come out iron fist in a velvet glove saying, look, more in sorrow than in anger. I'm tacitly saying there might be an election. It's now the ball's in their court. They are only going to look like wreckers, spoilers and disruptors.
And did he need,
I think
Paul?
It's really, really shrewd.
Okay, so did he need a sort of prime ministerial press conference to do that?
Yes, because he's not actually had... I mean, we're all obsessed with Boris and the Conservative leadership election. He actually hasn't had a prime ministerial set to with any of these opponents yet. He's had the coronation, but he actually hasn't had his first battle. He has to, if you like, keep his powder dry at this point, because he doesn't know what the enemy forces are going to do. I think it would have been so silly if he'd have come out and told everybody what his strategy was, because immediately that would have made Corbyn and the like look like they had forced this election, that they had been taken so seriously and so powerfully. There's half a chance now this rebellion might fizzle out. Only half a chance, but there wouldn't have been had he come out and called the election. I think he would have left himself as a hostage to fortune, whereas now he can blame absolutely anything on
Paul, you've
people.
made a very, very good argument in defence of Boris. You really have. All I would say to you is this. If he loses tomorrow, it looks like he's being pushed around by events. He could have perhaps preempted it today. I don't know, but look, you made a great argument, Paul, and thank you for calling. Let's go to Mike in Manchester, another new caller. Hi, Mike.
Hi, good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
I'd just like to say I agree with a lot of what Paul has just said.
Yep.
I also think Boris is leaving it up to the electorate to deselect these traitorous MPs who are threatening to put his legs off in any negotiation. I think he's hanging it out there for the people to say, yeah, we will vote against these people.
But, Mike, not many of us are members of local executive committees of Conservative associations, are we?
No, well, we don't have to vote for Conservative MPs in the north of England. I'm in Manchester.
Yes.
And there's a lot of areas in the north of England that voted Leave that are being totally ignored by their elected representative. Totally ignored. And I think it stands to you, Nigel, to either do a pact with Conservatives or Labour and the Lib Dems will get in and ruin Brexit, which is what they've intended to do for 3.5 years. They don't want Brexit. Theresa May's treaty is just another treaty. They don't want Brexit. They've ignored and suddenly now they're all Democrats last week. They've all become Democrats again.
And how do you feel, Mike?
I think it's absolutely disgraceful. Disgraceful.
How do you feel, Mike, about Boris being so keen on getting the withdrawal agreement through minus the backstop?
I don't think Boris is trying to get any agreement through. None at all.
Really?
I think Boris is very, very clever in pretending to play the game of this. But I think Boris is really a hard line. He wants a no-deal Brexit. He wants a clean break
Mike,
Brexit.
I couldn't disagree with you more. I could not disagree
I know
with you
you would disagree, but I think that Boris wants a no-deal Brexit.
All right, no, look, Mike, it's a point of view. You've made it very clearly and very strongly. I thank you for coming on and making it. John in North London says, Boris has merely asked MPs to think rationally before they act. This is the calm before the storm. Well, certainly. It's first day of term tomorrow. It's going to be very, very dramatic. I think it's the beginning of an epic autumn for British politics. I'm not quite sure where it's going to end, but I know that if Boris is bold enough and brave enough, he does have stronger cards, I think, ultimately, than the other side. We are going to go to Alison in Woodford, another new caller. Good evening, Alison.
Hi, Nigel.
Hello there. So, is there an election round the corner? Is Corbyn going to win tomorrow? How does it look to you?
Well, I mean, so I wanted to ask you a question. Just
we're having a debate, I thought.
I want you. So, based on Boris's kind of decision to say there's no snap election, do you think that he's decided to not call an election because that means he's delivering the will of the people in terms of, Brexit, or because he doesn't really think that he has confidence in himself as, gaining legitimate power from the people?
I think, Alison, if you look at the Leave side of the equation, Leave has a, certainly in constituency terms, Leave has a very big majority over Remain.
Northern Ireland, Scotland.
No, if you look at the north of England, the Midlands, and many other. Remember, over 60% of constituencies did vote to leave. All right.
Yeah.
So in that sense, he does have an advantage. His difficulty is, does he go down the route of reheating the withdrawal agreement, getting it amended, or does he go for the clean break, no deal? And that's the problem that he's got as a Leave Prime Minister, is that people who support Brexit are in both of those camps, I guess.
I totally understand. I'm completely conflicted myself as to what he should do. But I just think at the moment we're in a situation where, if we look at it from an outsider perspective, we're at risk. The United Kingdom is at risk of crumbling at the moment.
Well, we've certainly got some challenges. We've certainly got some issues, Alison, all of which is why let's get Brexit delivered, and we can then get on with the rest of our lives, I think.
So you don't think there should be people should be asked once
I think we should. I honestly believe if we don't implement the result of the first referendum, this country will never be the same place again. That's my feeling. Alison, that's all we got time for. Some great callers tonight. Fascinating. I'll be with you tomorrow at 6. Probably another press conference to listen to. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick, but up next, it's Ian Dowd.